Welcome to Leading Questions. I am Samuel Caldwell. I serve at the University at Albany as the Chief Diversity Officer and Associate Vice President for Diversity and Inclusion. Joining me this evening is our Provost and Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs, and also the first individual of Asian heritage to serve in that role here at the University at Albany, Dr. Carol Kim. Good evening, Provost Kim.
Good evening, Sam, and good evening to everyone who's joining us this evening. Yes, and so I'm just going to start right in with the introductions of our illustrious guests. So tonight, we're very fortunate to have with us three accomplished Asian American leaders in New York State politics and government who will be sharing their insights and perspectives on leadership, as well as experiences from their personal and professional journeys. So our first guest, U.S. Congresswoman Grace Meng, is serving her 5th term in the U.S. House of Representatives. Congresswoman Meng represents the 6th Congressional District of New York, encompassing the New York City boroughs of Queens, including West, Central, and Northeast Queens. She's the first and only Asian American member of Congress from New York State and the first female Congress member from Queens since former vice presidential nominee Geraldine Ferraro. Congresswoman Meng is a member of the powerful House Appropriations Committee and vice chair of its Subcommittee on State and Foreign Operations. She also sits on the Appropriations Subcommittee on Agriculture and the Subcommittee on Commerce, Justice, Science, and Related Agencies.
John C. Liu is the New York State Senator representing a broad area of Northeast Queens. Senator Liu is chair of the Committee on New York City Education. He also serves on the committees of Budget and Revenue, Education, Finance, Higher Education, Rules, and Transportation. A former New York City Comptroller and New York City Council member, Senator Liu also ran as candidate for mayor of New York City in 2013. He has been rightfully hailed as a trailblazer and pioneer. Senator Liu was the first Asian American to win legislative office in New York, and then the first to win citywide office, achievements that really represented milestones for Asian Americans in New York and across the nation.
And next we expect Assembly Member Yuh-Line Niou to be joining us here shortly. And she spent her career working on legislative and advocacy campaigns. In 2016, Assemblymember Niou was elected to serve the 65th Assembly District, representing Lower Manhattan, including the neighborhoods of the Lower East Side, Chinatown, the South Street Seaport area, and the Financial District and Battery Park City. She began working on state policy issues while in college, eventually accepting a position with the Washington State House Health Committee Chair. She went on to work as an advocate and organizer on anti-poverty issues, helping to build a broad coalition to fight predatory lending and assist low-income families in building their financial assets. Along with her colleagues, Assemblymember Niou helped form New York State's first ever Asian Pacific American Legislative Task Force, which will focus on advancing issues impacting New York's Asian American community. So I want to welcome, warmly welcome Congresswoman Meng, Senator Liu, and Assembly Member Niou as soon as she's able to join. I understand that she is running from the same meeting that Senator Liu was just in, so we expect her any moment. So I will, just to have everyone know, want to let everyone know that Congresswoman Meng unfortunately has to leave us a little early this evening due to another obligation. Our elected officials are running from one obligation to another, so we're lucky to have her this evening, but she will have to leave us just a little early, but she'll be with us for most of the program.
Before we get started, I want to ask our audience to please send your questions for our guests through the Q&A function. We've already had a question submitted. In fact, you may send them at any time during this session. So as questions are presented or our elected officials are providing responses to questions. If something comes to mind, please feel free to use the Q&A functionality to present your questions. For those of you who may be UAlbany alum, please feel free to indicate your class year, your program of study, and if you want to offer a shout out to your hometown, you may certainly feel free to do that as well. We will be getting to questions a little bit later in the program, and I'd also like to let you know that the audience chat function will be disabled during this particular conversation. I do see that we've had Assemblymember Niou join us. So Assemblymember Niou, thank you so much for joining us. We're excited to have you. We've had an opportunity to navigate through introductions, and we are preparing to enter into the interview section of our program. We typically do begin leading questions with an audience poll, just to get a sense of where the conversation is going to be going. And we'd ask our faculty, staff, alumni, and other audience members to please respond to the following poll question, which is, what percentage of U.S. elected office holders are of Asian American, and or Pacific Islander heritage? This would be elected officials at the local level, county, state, or those who hold elected office for a national office. So that's the question. We'll allow a few moments for responses to come in, and we have several options here. So please feel free to take advantage of the opportunity to participate in that particular poll question. Assemblymember Niou, it's good to have you. We see that you're literally traversing from one place to another. Please just travel safely. We see the responses are coming in. The majority of the responses thus far suggest that about 3%, followed by less than 1%. So about 88 or so, 87 or so percent of our audience, not too far from 90%, are believing that we're at 3% or less than 1%. And I'll ask at this time for our provost to, take it from there. We do have something that we do want to provide just as something for you to think about while we're considering that poll question. And provost, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sam. And so the answer to the question, as you can see, although the percentage of AAPI population in the United States is 6.1%, only 0.9%, so less than 1% of elected officials are of AAPI heritage. So I think the audience did pretty well on their guess there. And so if we move to, we have one other piece of information that we'd like to share, I think. And this is a representation of elected officials, so elected in office of different populations. And you can see the differential factor, they're a negative number. So looking at the population, percentages in the population, such as the AAPI population, 6.1%, but only 0.9% in elected office. So the differential is negative 85. And that follows for most of the populations, people of color in this country. The only positive number is our white, the white population at 46%. So it's great to have Congresswoman Meng, Senator Liu, and Assemblymember Niou to be with us tonight to discuss this, right? So it's a very interesting topic. We really appreciate you all being here and to be willing to share with us your experiences. And I think in particular, because community members are here of our campus, but in particular our students, and discussing your journeys, your experiences, and your wisdom with all of us, and again, in particular, with our students.
Yes, it looks as if Assemblymember Niou has found a very safe landing spot, so we're grateful for that. I'm sure our panelists have some thoughts on both the results of the poll and the information included in the slides we've just shown relative to representation in the population, yet level of representation in elected office. I'll be stepping away for a short time to handle incoming questions coming in through the Q&A function. So I'll remind our audience again to take advantage of that. And our provost will have a conversation with U.S. Representative Meng, Senator Liu, Assemblymember Niou, and I'll be back in the second half of our program for our lightning round of questions and audience Q&A.
Great, thank you, Sam. And again, welcome panelists. And we're again so grateful to you for sharing your time, insights, your advice with our students this evening, in particular because they're starting to prepare to embark on their own careers one day, and perhaps some as elected officials. So we're going to start on our question segment. And, thinking about the poll question and about the data that we just shared with all of you and our audience. So for each of you, why do you feel there aren't more leaders of Asian heritage in public service, higher education, or other areas for that matter, right? So in leadership roles, and how do we encourage the next generation, the students to get more involved and really consider, a life in public service? So why don't we start with Congresswoman Meng?
Thank you to University at Albany for having us here today. I know I do have to leave early, but I just want to emphasize that if there are questions that are directed at me, or if it would be helpful to answer, we're happy to get back to any students after tonight's panel. Growing up, I was born and raised in New York, but honestly, getting involved in politics and running for office isn't necessarily something that we're encouraged to do. This is kind of a generalization, but most Asian American first-gen immigrants, when they're raising their kids here, they're not saying, "Oh, I hope my kid can be a politician one day," right? And so it's not something also that we've grown up seeing, right? That saying where you can't be what you can't see. And so I think that plays a role too. But I think in terms of helping more young people get involved, when I talk to younger AAPIs, I try to remind them that you don't have to have a fancy title or be wealthy to make a difference in this world. Even helping those around you in your neighborhood, in your community, in your schools and workplaces, it can make a huge difference. And that initial step of getting involved in the community and being confident of who you are and what you bring to the table is really important, because too many voices, especially in our communities, have traditionally been left out.
Great, thank you so much. Senator Liu.
Yeah, I largely agree. I remember telling my folks that I was going to run for city council. And the first thing they said was, "That is awesome. But maybe you want to get married first?" And so I got married and had another conversation with them and saying, I'm thinking about running for city council. And they said, "Yeah, that'd be great. But we'd like to be grandparents." And so we did that. And then I said it to them one more time. And they said, "You know what? Maybe you and Jenny should get a house." And so we did all that. And then finally, I ran for city council and became a council member. It's true that this is not necessarily the pursuit in life that many of our parents, and I'm a parent myself now, so is Grace, we don't necessarily encourage kids or the next generation to enter public service or to run for office, which is why I'm on this panel right now, which is why I think my colleagues in government are on this panel. We're here to encourage our future leaders to become leaders, to be involved, to know the issues, and to talk, to speak out. That is always the first step in engaging in public office and public service. Whether you run for office or not, it's just important that we have more Asian Americans, AAPI members, really understanding the issues that are directly relevant to our community, but issues overall. And, Yuh-Line and I just came from a rally at the state capitol denouncing what the Supreme Court is, we think, about to do based on a leaked document last night. This is an issue that's not necessarily, a woman's right to choose is not necessarily just relevant to the Asian American community, but I'm heartened to see many Asian American women and men out there at the rally. It's about getting our fair share, because you don't, in democracy, which I think we have a pretty good form of in the United States, no one gets spoon-fed anything. We have to fight for every little morsel, and whether that be resources for our community in the spate of anti-Asian hate, or just making sure that our community is going to be well represented across a wide range of issues. We have to be involved and we have to speak out. So thanks for having this. I'm really going to enjoy this.
Well, thank you, Senator Liu. Great comments from both you and Congresswoman Meng. I'm going to turn it over to Assembly Member Niou. Hello.
Yeah, no, I first off, I just want to thank you so much for having me here. I was just at this rally, and so I just really am glad that I was able to hustle over and make it. And I just want to say thank you also for making sure that I went last, because I really want to make sure that I'm actually giving proper respect and credence to the fact that I am here because of these other legislators who stand with us today. Congresswoman Meng was the first Asian American woman, well, actually Ellen Young, right? But first Asian American, second Asian American woman to hold that seat. And I think that, during this time, and her father was actually the first Asian American to ever hold any elected seat on the state level. And I think that it's really clear for us to note that we have to pave our own way when it comes to having more representation, because I couldn't believe that in 2016, I was still a first and an only of sorts, and I think that it's really important that we're noting that. I don't even know how Grace was able to be in this legislature by herself as the only Asian American at the time, and then making it so that we actually have the kind of voice that we need. She was willing to drop the data segregation bill. She was willing to help us to fight for more representation. And then, we're standing here with, Senator John Liu, who, he was the first ever citywide elected of Asian descent. I mean, hands down, an incredible role model. And the only reason why, we are able to break those ceilings is because we have community behind us, that we have, the ability to be able to have good mentors. And I also have to say that, these legislators here are my mentors, and this is why it's so important. I actually call John Grandpa. I know it's not because of his age, really. It's he hates when I do this. But the fact of the matter is, we have 3 generations almost of legislators in between us, right? So it's John. It's John Liu, right? And then he actually, was the principal when Assemblymember Ron Kim was actually his intern when he was running for office. And so then I later on became Assemblymember Ron Kim's chief of staff. And so I think it's really important that we note and recognize that we have to build our own pathways, and that we are actually making it so that we are paving the road, just so that it's a little bit easier for the next generation and the next generation and next generation to come. And I think that, one thing that I want to note is, and this is just for the students here, is how important it is to recognize that even though we're seeing, so little representation when we're looking at, less than 1%, it's still something to note that we have made such a huge difference already, because let's remember in history that, I have colleagues here in Albany who were reminding me that when they first took office as women, that there were no women's restrooms in the Capitol, because they didn't think that women could be legislators. And then on top of that, let's remember that women, white women couldn't vote. It's been since 1920, right? When they passed the women's suffrage. And then on top of that, we forget that it was only in 1965 that we were actually able to have women of color vote, right? And so when you think about that, and then you think about the fact that Grace Meng became an elected official in New York State, you know, it starts to dawn on you that we are very young politically, and that we also have this timeline that didn't allow us for representation for so long. We were kept from the vote. We were kept from having political representation. There was misogyny laws where people could not interracially marry. There were laws that prevented us from buying housing, you know, to be able to own property, to have, you know, any ability to be able to have representation. There was the Chinese Exclusion Act. There was Japanese internment. Like, it was written in for us to be excluded, right? And so I think that, you know, we have to recognize that, you know, there's a lot of thinking and change that has to happen before we have the right representation. And you know, Grace is right. You know, they have that saying, like, if you can see it, you can be it. But, you know, for so many of us, you know, for Grace, there wasn't a lot of seeing, right? For me, I got to see Grace. I got to see John. And I got to see, you know, Gary Locke become the first governor of a state, you know, when I was a young teenager. And I think that it's really important that, you know, when we're noting that seeing is believing, that we're also being the thing that, you know, we want to see. So I think that, you know, it's really, really amazing that you're doing this.
Oh, well, thank you. And just hearing your opening statements here, I know is going to be, you know, encouraging to the students, sharing your journeys. It does make a huge difference to our students. So thank you so much for being here and being willing to share. And, you know, I'm hearing from each of you about this, if you can see it, you can be it, the role model piece. So it would be great to hear from you an overview of your journey to public office. And I know some of you touched on that a bit, but why is it that you decided, you know, what was the decision process to get involved in public service and go into leadership? So Senator Liu, do you want to start this time?
Yeah, I mean, my council member inspired me to run for office. My city council member, she's not Asian, but she thought Asians were never trying to assimilate, always trying to invade. And that Asians were nothing more than rude merchants, illegal aliens, and criminal smugglers. And when I read that in the paper one morning, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that this was an elected official representing Flushing, New York, which was already by then in the mid-90s, a fast-growing community with Asian American residents, businesses, lots of activity. And you know, those comments were directed at a community that this elected official represented. And worse yet, it wasn't just offensive, it was also scapegoating, because with the rapid growth, the community had lots of problems that should have been addressed by government through representation, but instead of representing and bringing resources back, this elected official chose to blame Asians for not getting with the program and for making the place dirty and smelly and crowded, and it was just awful. So that's how I got inspired to run for office in a very quick, much faster than I expected that I would be doing. That's how I entered this path. I never studied politics. I'm just a mathematical physics major, not to perpetuate stereotypes or anything like that.
Well, thank you, Senator Liu. Assembly Member Niou?
Sure. You know, I had never wanted to run for office, actually. I didn't want to run for office. And I think that a lot of times, I mean, Grace and I commiserate about this a lot, but I think for women, it's just harder to make that decision. And we have to be asked so many more times, you know. I mean, I heard from John, like, he's like always wanted to be an elected, right? Whereas like we were just like, I don't think so. And I think that it's really hard for us to actually, you know, think, you know, this is a path for me. Like I thought that that was like something that I never wanted to do. I didn't think I always felt like, oh, my secret superpower is to be like the best staffer ever. Like I am really good at staffing people. And I think that, you know, for me, I never thought that until I realized that we didn't have representation. And I just thought, you know, how important it is for us to have representation. And I was, you know, shocked. I was shocked when I walked into, you know, the chambers here in Albany, and I was staffing Ron at the time. I was his chief of staff, and I was like, you know, just walking in for the very first time for his inauguration into the chambers. And before I even got there, like, you know, somebody grabbed my ass in the elevator, and then I was like shocked by that. And then when I got to the chamber, you know, somebody congratulated me for winning Congress because they thought I was Grace. And, you know, just like, then this guy like ran up to Ron and was just like, I hear that you're the first Korean. Do you know how to dance Gangnam Style? Like it was really clear that we needed to have more diversity in our leadership and in, you know, our state. And I knew that also without the lenses that our communities deserve in their representation, then we weren't going to have the bills and the things that, and the, you know, and the issue focus that we needed for our communities. You know, it was very, very clear to me that, you know, unless we brought it up, it was never going to be brought up, some of the issues that we cared about. Unless, you know, I was fighting to make sure that we actually had money inside of our budget allocated to our community organizations, it was never going to happen. There was $0, $0 in our state budget allocated to our Asian American organizations. And I had to fight for the first few dollars, and then we fought for more dollars. And then this year, you know, John and I were actually finally able to get $20 million allocated to Asian American, you know, community organizations. But it took so long. It took so much fight. And, you know, also it was only, you know, this year that I was able to finally pass a bill that Grace Meng first sponsored on data disaggregation. It just, I mean, how long ago was that, right? And yet it took that many attempts to be able to get our voice heard. And it was only because we had many more Asian Americans elected to office, we were able to have more people fighting for these issues, and we were able to have better representation. And so that's when I realized, you know, we have to, you know, it was something for me that was like a pivotal moment when I realized like there is so little representation and we need to have that lens, and it's gonna hurt. It's gonna hurt when I'm here, and it's gonna suck, you know, and it's going to really, really be hard. And it's going to really be really difficult to move that needle. But when I see the things that we're going through now, and when I know that I've had those conversations with my colleagues, with folks on the ground, and we know how hard it is, and we knew, like, you know, that things were coming when we heard what Trump was saying, when we heard what was happening on the federal level, we knew that there was going to be so much pain, and we anticipated it, but there was no way of preventing it. And we just, we knew that there was need for representation and need for us to be able to stand up when it counted the most. So
thank you for sharing.
mm-hmm.
Congresswoman Meng?
Well, that's why I think events like this are important, because I'll bet that me and John and Yuh-Line didn't get to be a part of many events like this where we saw people in fields like this. I never thought it was even a possibility, because I had never seen really a politician that looked like me. You know, something positive is, you know, now after so many APIs have been elected in our state and city levels, it's actually hard to keep track. I had to make a list of all the API electeds within New York City and state the other day, and I almost couldn't keep track of them for a second. And that's such a good problem. But it's really important, even for the students on this call, to realize that, you know, they can be anything that they want to be. You know, I never took political science classes either, although I will defy that Asian stereotype because I'm probably not good at math and science. But I interned in a ton of government agencies, federal and state mostly, And I dreamed of working for a government agency or a politician, but just never entertained that possibility. And changing that standards is really important for, especially for our young people. When I first ran for office, my son was 4 years old, and obviously I was probably the only candidate that he knew of. And, you know, in talking about changing standards, he actually asked me one night if men were allowed to run for Congress, right? Now, if only he knew. But that just shows that, you know, we have to change the standards of what we consider normal and conventional in this country.
Thank you. What I hear across all three of your responses is really that, you know, what got you into working in public service, being legislators, was that you want to make change. I think bottom line, and you were inspired in different ways to make that change, or what prompted you. But yeah, wow. You know, and again, thank you. Thank you for your service. We have time, if we can go very fast, for one more question. And I will start with Assembly Member Niou, and we'll just quickly do this. In recent years, we've really seen a rise of a louder, more active Asian constituency, especially in response to the rise in violence and bias incidents, right? So what are some of the lessons you think that the AAPI community can learn from all of this in the past few years? So I'll start with Assemblywoman Niou.
Yeah, I think that, you know, the most important thing is to remember that, you know, we have perpetual foreigner syndrome. We have model minority myth that is so pervasive throughout our communities, throughout how, you know, people perceive us. And I think that it's really important that, you know, folks also understand that this racism, again, I will say that it's state sanctioned, that it's something that is so deeply ingrained in our country's history and in the way that we've been founded and in how we operate, that, you know, this racism is systemic and it's ingrained. And, you know, a lot of times people think that it happened overnight. It did not. A lot of times people forget that this is something that is so pervasive throughout our system, from the neglect, from us being absent from budgets, from, you know, folks not understanding that we have, you know, access issues, et cetera. You know, 1 in 4 Asian Americans lives in poverty, yet we have the least amount of social benefits when we are the most impoverished ethnic group here in New York. You know, this is the kind of severe neglect of our communities because of the invisibilization of us that is so pervasive that it's so harmful and people don't realize it. And people want a silver bullet to fix a lot of these issues that we're experiencing right now, but there isn't one, because this is systemic, right? And we need to dismantle whole systems to be able to you know, really fix some of these issues, and to, you know, fund and to understand, you know, that we need to make sure that we're actually having the same kind of access as, you know, everybody else. You know, we don't have equity. We don't have the ability to be able to have the very basic things, you know, that we need. So I just want to say thank you for asking that question.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Congresswoman Meng?
Yeah, I just want to piggyback off what the Assemblywoman mentioned about systemic inequalities. If you just even take a look at in recent years, how our government tried to address COVID relief at different levels. Even at the beginning, in the federal level, Congress passed some programs that were really helpful, right? Everything from giving cash to helping our small businesses, our restaurants, giving out free testing kits. But so many times, and this sort of relates to one of the questions in the chat, our community could not access them because there was no multilingual help. And this is true from both parties. We had to beg for language assistance for the most vulnerable in our community and the ones that needed this type of assistance the most. Many people in our Queens, New York community, for example, they were not helped with all the government programs that existed. If you were undocumented, you did not receive cash rebates like other families did. And so that's just one example. But Yuh-Line and John fought hard for the money in the budget, and I'm incredibly proud of their efforts. But let's be clear, that money is owed to our community. That is an invoice that is way past due. And that's why so many in our communities in so many different topics have not received or not been able to access the same level of services that many of us, many other communities have. And I will say lastly that, some people say, oh, our community has finally started speaking out during the past 2 years, but that's not really true. We have been speaking out. We've been discriminated against for years in this country, even with, enacted legislation like the Chinese Exclusion Act. But people are finally beginning to hear us. And I do want to put a plug for the incredible coalitions that have been built and expanded during these past few years. When you go to these Stop AAPI Hate rallies and vigils, it's not just Asians standing there, it's so many people from different communities. And sometimes that's hard even to explain to maybe earlier generations of AAPIs in our communities. But it's on our shoulders to try to bridge that gap so that we can, have more leverage, create more leverage with these larger coalitions.
Great, thank you so much. And Senator Liu?
I agree with everything that Grace and Yuh-Line have said.
Okay, that was nice and quick, thank you. But, again, what I'm hearing is the passion that each of you has for supporting your community, your districts, the AAPI community, and how important that is. Thank you. Just this has been great. What I'd like to do now is to invite Sam Caldwell to join us again. And also, I know Congresswoman Meng, again, everyone is, all of you are so busy and really appreciate your presence here. Congresswoman Meng, unfortunately, you won't be able to join us for the lightning round, which, personally it's kind of fun, but, maybe next time. And I really hope that you'll come back to UAlbany and hopefully even in person and meet some of our students. They'd be so excited to meet all of you. So hopefully you'll all consider coming to campus and seeing you in person. So thank you so much, Congresswoman Meng, for being here tonight, and really appreciate all of that you've shared with us. Thank you. So I'm going to turn it over to Sam Caldwell.
Thank you, Provost Kim. I appreciate that. So panelists, it's time for the leading questions lightning round. We have a few quick questions and we'd like to hear your quick answers to them. And they're friendly lightning round questions for certain. So I actually heard a reference from Assemblymember Niou to superpowers earlier. And since we've already got a small glimpse of your superpowers in terms of learning how to be in two places at one time, I'll ask, if you had any other superpower, what would it be?
I do actually have a superpower. People probably know this, but I am actually on the spectrum. So I have autism spectrum disorder is what they call it, but I will say that, I have hyperfocus. And so a lot of people probably have not read certain bills or budget bills all the way through, but I have, so I can actually do it. So that's a superpower, I think.
Thank you very much. And we're very, very tuned in to the population at the University of Albany that live with invisible disabilities or so-called disabilities. So thank you very much for sharing that, Assemblymember Niou.
Thank you.
Senator Liu, superpower in addition to being in two places at once.
I I don't have any superpowers. In
This
fact,
is a man who's done Iron Man like 50 times.
I don't, there's no superpowers. I mean, I would actually tell our students here that you don't need to have superpowers. You need to just be focused and getting to know the issues, getting involved and speaking your mind. And that inevitably leads you to greater levels of public service. So no superpowers needed. Just be yourself.
Well, I appreciate your reference to self-advocacy, Senator Liu, and just hearing you recount your experience relative to sharing with your family your plans to serve in public office and having to go multiple times to have that conversation. I think that's a lesson in and of itself. So thank you very much for sharing that. Next question. You're all New York City residents. So what is your favorite thing to do in New York City in the few moments that you have that you would characterize as free time? Senator Liu.
Eat.
Fair enough. Any particular place or any particular cuisine?
Well, I like to eat. Yeah, it's all sorts of cuisines. I do not want to say anything about Flushing or Chinatown being places to get great food. We're not just about food, but I do like to eat. And there are lots of places to get every kind of food across the world right here in New York City.
Understood. And we'll take that as a cue that we can support some of the small businesses in your respective districts. So
Yeah.
thank you for that cue. Assemblymember Niou.
Probably the same, but I would like to add, since he already said eat, I would say karaoke. I love to karaoke. It is probably how most politics are done in Chinatown.
Understood. Thank you very much for sharing that. Favorite political TV drama or comedy, current or past? And we'll start with the assembly member.
It has to be a political drama.
Well, you know what? That's the way the question is phrased. But if you have a favorite drama,
It's fine. It's gonna be Veep or West Wing, but sometimes it gets too real, so then the
Understood.
absurdity starts to creep in.
Understood. And they're both very entertaining. Senator Liu.
I don't watch political dramas.
Understood.
Yeah.
How about crime drama?
I will tell you, one of my favorite series of all times has been Fresh Off the Boat. I gotta tell you, I love all the episodes, the YouTube snippets, like everything. So I'd have to say Fresh Off the Boat, not because it's political, but because it's comedy. And you know what? I think it actually has helped people understand the Asian American community better. Even though it's lighthearted, I think, there's some people just see Asian Americans more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say it lends some insight into the experience as well. So thank you very much for sharing that. One final lightning round question before we transition into Q&A, and we have some questions lined up. In terms of requests or issues that your offices, whether in the legislative office building or perhaps in district, gets the most calls about, what would the subject be relative to the issues that you hear the most from relative to your constituents? Assemblymember Niou.
So I think that for us, it's always been housing, and then for particular access issues. So language access is really huge. And then obviously it's been housing related, so hot water, heat, mold, a lot of public housing issues. And, that just really takes up a very large part of our constituent case portfolio.
Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing that. Senator Liu?
Well, unfortunately, these last couple of years, one of the ongoing themes of constituent requests and complaints has been anti-Asian incidents, both violent as well as just really annoying pain in the neck incidents where the bigotry and hate against Asian Americans continues to come out, alongside this global pandemic that some people blame us for. And so that's unfortunately been the basis of even a lot of the work that Yuh-Line and I do in Albany, in the state capitol here.
Thank you. And thank you for the reminder that when misinformation is put out very persistently, it leads to people walking away believing false narratives. So we appreciate that reminder. Relative to questions from the audience, our first question comes from audience member Eric. And Eric's question is, what values from your culture did you carry along or do you carry along even as you navigate your career as an elected official? Assembly Member Niou, please.
Oh, let John go first on this one. I've been
No
going
problem
first
at
a
all.
lot.
Senator Lieu.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Part of what I actually have done in the 20 years that I've been in various offices is not to always talk about the cultural aspects, just because my contention is generally that we're all pretty much the same, that we only look different 1 millimeter in, and then we're all the same. So cultural things, I like I'm not a great example to talk about that, just because even though I wasn't born here, I've been here since I was 5 years old. So I've grown up American, even though a lot of people don't see me as American. You mentioned the perpetual foreigner syndrome. So are there cultural things that make me different from other people? I just try not to differentiate in the first place. But if you really push me to it, I think the main cultural difference that I grew up with is that I've been labeled. I get labeled by Asians as being too American, and I get labeled as like I guess real Americans as someone who's not truly American. So I think that background of growing up here with those double labels, depending on who was being asked or who was talking about me, that has certainly sensitized me to different perspectives.
Yeah, and that whole notion of perpetually walking a tightrope is something that sounds exhausting.
Yeah. On the one hand, it's like, okay, you got the best of both worlds. On the other hand, it's like you don't belong in either.
We
Thank
hear
you.
this also from our students too. And I experience this myself. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah. Yep. Assembly Member Niou, values from your culture, however you define that, that you've carried or continue to carry.
I echo John in some aspects, right? Like I think that that concept of home is so interesting when you're talking about being an immigrant kid or like growing up in a country that doesn't recognize you. And I think that there is a lot of that going on all the time. But I do think that when I'm looking at some of the things I think that make me maybe a better legislator in some aspects, I would say, I think that I'm the oldest daughter in a Chinese family. That makes it so that there is all the responsibility and none of the privileges that my little brother might have. So I think that it's really interesting when I'm talking a little bit about some of the pressures that I'm under and like some of the things that I think that are very I guess maybe culturally more relevant to some families. And I think that, my parents are very traditional. And so I kind of had a very similar conversation with my parents as John had with his parents. But I think that as a woman, I couldn't just say yes to deciding to get married or having kids or buying a house before I could do certain things. I couldn't just appease in that sense. Otherwise I wouldn't have certain choices. And so I think that there are sort of cultural things I have to bring with me on that front. And then I think that there's some things that obviously are very important, which is also language. I definitely have my language skills, which were given to me by my parents, my grandparents, and then, every single day, it's something that services my constituents and helps them to be able to have more access to our government. And I think that that's something that I'm very grateful to be able to have.
Yeah, thank you, Assembly Member Niou. And you actually touched upon a little bit earlier in the comments that you offered. You spoke a bit about the intersectionality of your identity. And so being an Asian woman who also is navigating a space where you are living with, excuse me, with something that's been framed as autism, may suggest that your experience has been perhaps a little bit different from someone who may be an Asian male or someone who may share only one aspect of that intersectional identity. So thank you for opening up the conversation to that part as well. We have
Well,
a
actually, it's
question.
really interesting, the cultural aspect when it
Please,
comes to a disability,
for
because
sure.
especially mine, because my parents, I was diagnosed as a young adult, and my parents, being on the spectrum and then being a girl, you have, it's really much harder to diagnose for one, because it's just more difficult. We mimic, we mask, and I think that there's certain things that make it so that it's much harder to diagnose. But I will say that the things that come with being on the spectrum, such as not being able to look at anybody in the eye, or like having certain social behaviors that are a little bit less I guess extroverted in some aspects, I guess. But I think that from my parents' standpoint, they were very happy. They were very happy with the fact that I never talked back to them, never looked them in the eye. Always, was willing to, John's very surprised. But when I was playing piano, I was a young prodigy, and I was very, very good and had that hyper focus for any subject that I was asked to take. And I scored 99.9 percentile on every single standardized test. And it was just, my parents were just totally fine with it. And they did not care that in every single report card, it was like, does not answer when called, does not play well with other children, does not they didn't even note that maybe they need to take a look. So I think that it was something that was very interesting culturally.
Well, thank you very much for sharing that window into what your experience looked like. And I have to offer that Senator Liu has a wonderful prospect for a career in improv. So whenever his career in political service ends, I think that will work, because I'm absolutely enjoying his nonverbals here. We have two questions that we'll kind of try to frame together as our time is winding down. And this is really back to the whole notion of encouraging younger Asian Americans, younger individuals of Asian and or Pacific Island heritage to actively pursue and or participate in the political process. So if I were to look at the questions, one is asking specifically about what perhaps could be done to encourage that. And then the other question is actually getting into how might educational institutions or institutions of higher ed educate and or encourage students, including Asian Americans among other minoritized populations, to consider careers in public service. And they go further to recommend that perhaps some type of course offering among Gen Ed that really speaks to political discourse and the fact that our political system is at its best when we have robust participation from all populations is something that we might want to consider. So I'll offer that question to the senator first.
I will be very brief. I think all the students who would like to get their feet wet in government and politics, email Yuh-Line or myself or both of us, and take advantage of the fact that we're in the state capitol, which is like down Washington Avenue from your campus, and spend some time in our offices and earn an internship. And for you, Madam Provost and Chief Diversity Officer, Albany can give academic credit for each semester that the students work as interns in our offices. Other colleges give that kind of academic credit. It's a real life learning experience.
Definitely. And in fact, we do that in particular through our Rockefeller College of Public service. So thank you for putting a plug in for that.
Well, I don't think I've ever gotten any applications from Albany
Me neither.
students.
Okay, so we will rectify
So,
that.
so I'll say we have homework to do, and we embrace it for certain. I think those are all the questions that we have time for this evening. I know we're transitioning into the latter part of our program, so I do want to thank the audience for participating and for being so actively engaged in the discussion this evening. And at this point, I'll pass the conversation back to our provost.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sam. This has been such a great conversation. I hate to see it end. I wish it could go on for much longer, and I'm sure our students would love to hear more from you. I know that Congresswoman Meng had mentioned, sending on some of these questions to her, and we will also send you the questions that were not asked, because we have several that we just didn't have the time. Definitely, even though I am personally not in public service in the legislature or a congressional member, the same kinds of experiences just for Asian Americans in any kind of leadership role, because as you know, right, whether that's a C-suite position or in higher ed, there are not as many Asians. So your experience and what you shared with us really is inspiring in whatever our students want to pursue. So I really thank you for being here, taking the time, because I know you have very little of it. So thank you for sharing with us. It's been great to have you here and very inspiring. In our last minute, so if I can get 30 seconds from each of you, any closing thoughts that you'd like to share? So Senator Liu?
I'm glad you did this during Asian American Heritage Month. This is a month where we really need to focus more on the Asian American experience and what we need to do going forward, including opportunities as well as responsibilities. I think all the students who have engaged in today's conversation, number one, I thank them, because there's a lot of other things they could have been doing at this time. But I encourage the students not to just leave this conversation and go about everything else that they're doing, but try to focus some of what they've learned here tonight into actions going forward.
Thank you so much, Senator. Assemblymember Niou?
Yeah, first I want to say thank you again to everybody for participating. I think it's amazing to also be able to see an Asian American provost. I also wanted to say that it's really great for folks to be able to have these opportunities to be able to, access different kinds of leaderships, because I will say that, when I was younger, I didn't get to see as much. And I think that it's really important to be able to ask for mentorship. I think that those opportunities are really huge. I will say that, for students right now, just think about how you want to reach out to somebody, and then don't be afraid to ask, right? I think that people oftentimes are a little bit afraid to ask. And I think that it's important for us to be bold and be courageous, because if you want to make changes, if you want to be a public servant, if you want to be a leader in the community, if you want to speak up for somebody else, or if you want to just head up a new company, or if you want to start something different, you want to be able to take that chance and opportunity to be able to ask for the help that you need, or for the guidance that you need, and to remember that you don't need, and this is something my mentor told me, that you don't need a title, you don't need a fancy office or a big desk, or a pencil or even a pen or anything to be able to lead from where you're at. And I think that it's important to recognize that and to remind yourself, and that there's a lot of different kinds of leadership styles, and there's a lot of different kinds of ways to be a leader, because some people will always think of like that alpha male type of style of leadership, but not everyone's that kind of leader. And then you'll see that it's really important that we have all different kinds of leadership in order to be able to have the representation that we deserve. So thank you.
Thank you both. Excellent closing statements. I appreciate that. I want to thank you as guests this evening. So I want to recognize Congresswoman Grace Meng and Senator John Liu and Assemblymember Niou for joining us this evening. We were so grateful to you for your public service and for sharing your personal journeys and the insights, especially with our students this evening. It's been very inspiring. And I want to extend an invitation to the two of you to also maybe join us sometime, maybe in person, and come to campus and meet our students. I know that they'd be extremely excited to meet you. You're always welcome to come to our campus. I want to thank Sam for facilitating this evening. As always, Sam, it's a pleasure to work with you. I also want to just thank a few offices that made this evening what it was, right? So the Office of Government and Community Relations, the Office of Public Engagement, the Center for Leadership and Service, Rockefeller College of Public Affairs and Policy, and UAlbany's ITS field support staff. And I also want to thank all of you who joined us this evening for leading questions. Thank you for being here this evening, and good night.